everyone. Paul Ruppel here with Fox 29 News Now. I'm the digital media manager here at Fox 29, and this is our platform where we will bring you live events whenever they're available. Right now we're waiting for a couple to begin, so we're going to bring you some reports from our reporters. We're going to start with Steve Keeley. He was out on a tragic discovery in southwest Philadelphia. Police say they found someone's body in a suitcase. Steve has been following this report all morning, and he had a live report for us from outside police headquarters. Here's his report.
Well, Philly police here at headquarters are trying to find out who would kill somebody and then stuff their body in a suitcase and then throw it in a dumpster in 90-degree heat, where residents would start smelling the most awful stench they ever smelled in their lives, they told police. The staff here at the Bartram Gardens Housing Project said the stench was way worse than it usually is, especially in the heat. Housing Authority police first notified Philly police at 4:15 yesterday. And after the first officer arrived, looked to see where that strong stench was coming from, he unzipped the suitcase and saw the decomposing body of what appeared to be at first a black female still wearing some clothing. The initial report was we thought it was an adult black female. That's not even 100% right now. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, it's a possibility, but I'm just not comfortable saying that right now until I get the experts from the medical examiners. And so I'm not saying that it's not. But they will let us know. They'll work with homicide as they always do, so that we can figure out the identity of the individual, as I indicated previously, and so that we can make a connection. Someone is missing a loved one somewhere, and so we got to find out who that is.
Police are waiting for the medical examiner's autopsy results to learn several things: how the person was killed, when they were killed, and if fingerprints are still intact or missing persons cases match any still visible tattoos, scars, or identifying clothing they were wearing. Family could be notified to help identify the person. Until then, Philly police have no idea who this was, how they died, or who put them there. But they do believe they've got a killer out there somewhere that knows. At police headquarters, Steve Keeley, Fox 29 News. Back to you.
Sabina Kuriakos, one of our reporters, has been following whether Made in America may be on the move. The festival is apparently not welcome on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway after 2018. So will it be hosted at a different location or leave Philadelphia forever? Here is Sabina's report.
The city has pretty much confirmed it. Billy Penn, the first to report that Made in America is going to be kicked off the Parkway after this Labor Day weekend. I'm going to step out of the shot because, of course, here we are in the Art Museum steps, and this is just that iconic Philly image, the Parkway. And if we go to video, you can see, again, tens of thousands of people fill the Parkway each year since 2012 for Labor Day weekend, Made in America. It all started under Mayor Nunner's administration, but now Mayor Kenny's office is saying that they no longer want the festival out here. Now, Rock Nation, Jay-Z's company who puts on the festival, says that it's going to stay in Philadelphia, just possibly at another location. The city says it's open to that, according to Billy Penn and Philly.com, but so far, no word on any suggested alternate locations. So, of course, we're on the Rocky Steps, so we spoke with a runner about what he thinks about the whole thing. Native Philadelphian, here he is.
As much as it may be a challenge to create the structure to keep everybody safe, I think that it still generates a lot of revenue for the city as well as everyone else involved. I think that it's sort of like winning the Super Bowl, where when there are iconic events, just everyone in general is having fun.
And back out here live. So, of course, the big question is, why is the city kicking Made in America off the Parkway? Well, according to Billy Penn, the city says they don't need the huge economic boost that it once did that comes from the festival each year. Now, last year, Billy Penn says the festival cost more than $1 million to put on. Of that, Rock Nation paid back the city about $600,000. But of course, the city footed the rest of the bill. Unlike in years past, the first year, the city actually paid nothing. Rock Nation paid all of it, of course, back then. It cost about half, $500,000. For now, we're at the Art Museum. Sabina Kiriakos, back to you.
Our Good Day Philadelphia team was reacting to the story this morning. Quincy Harris joined Mike and Alex and Karen Hepp to discuss the issue, and here's what they had to say.
The Quincy Harris Morning Show on 100.3.
Yeah.
I said it feels like a Facebook post, right, where you say that you're in a relationship to it's complicated. It feels very, very weird. Now, you know, Made in America in the last 6 years has brought in an estimated $31 million to Philadelphia. It just feels, where else would you put it? Like, it's September. If you put it down by the stadiums, it's kind of hard because that's when the Eagles start playing.
Oh, that's boring, too.
Yeah, you can't do it.
There's no reason to do that.
Where? I don't know where. Like you said, Alex, maybe Belmont Plateau, but
You got the same financial
Paramount
issues.
Park over there.
I don't like it. I do know that the Made in America festival has kind of lost its lost its Budweiser sponsorship, and in the first couple of years it's been Beyonce headlining, it's been Jay-Z headlining, it's been Rihanna, it's been Kanye West. I don't know, maybe they're running out of people. I just feel like it's a good thing for the city, and now the city is saying because of the tourism was down when they brought Made in America to Philadelphia. Now it's up, and they're like, oh, we don't need it.
Well, keep it up.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying. We have to build upon. That's what big major cities do. We build upon the things that we have and we make them great. I don't know where else that you put this festival.
Well, so what's really going on here?
I feel like come on. I think they're going to kind of move it away from Philly. Where else can you put it?
I feel like it's because of like whiny neighbor. Sorry, my sister lives there.
Ouch.
But people that are complaining in that neighborhood, like people at Fairmount, fancy
I never
pants.
complained.
Yeah. Some people say they already plan to be out of town that week because it's Labor Day weekend. So they go down the shore or do something else. And you just kind of, because if they deal with the other stuff, you deal with the 4th of July. Are they going to try and stop that?
And can we talk about the elephant in the room?
What?
In the beginning of the Made in America festival, they would have because it's a 2-day festival. One day you would have, maybe like a hip hop artist. The second day you would have to close out, and then the second day was like a rock, artist. Now it seems as if Made in America is all hip hop festival.
It is hip hop,
right? So now
is that it?
That's
Is there an underlying
no one's going to say it.
bias?
I'll say it here. I don't know.
Too many hip hop fans out on the Parkway? That better not be what it is.
And of course, no one from the city will say that.
Right.
But I'll say it. Seems a little weird.
Oh, well, how come you're right? How come Wah Wah Welcome America is okay?
And let's bring some more things in. Another thing about Wow Wow Welcome America that I did not like once Mayor Kinney came into office that the roots were pulled from Wow Wow Welcome America. I feel like the roots are great. They're international. They're on the Tonight Show.
They are.
This feels
That
weird, guys. Feels weird. You won't say it.
Now hold on. Who performed this year?
Pitbull performed. I mean, he's a good artist.
It was good.
The Roots have such a connection here in the city. It just feels as if hip hop is getting a
All right,
little.
let's get to the bottom of it.
Okay.
We will dedicate this show we call Good Day Philadelphia to find out what the real story is, because I don't think the real story is coming out.
Yeah.
Because they didn't put out a press release. Just tell us you've made this decision and who decided this.
Yeah.
Think it through, right?
That was Good Day Philadelphia this morning. Mike Jarek, Alex Holly, and Karen Hepp discussing the move of Made in America. I want to let you know we're keeping an eye on an event that's about to take place in Washington, D.C. Let's show you that. This is members of the House and others from Congress are holding a press conference on the 170th anniversary of the first Women's Rights Convention. We'll take you here as soon as this begins. In the meantime, earlier this morning, Sky Fox was over the scene of a ICE protest in Philadelphia. Let's show you some video of that. This was Sky Fox over the scene as ICE protesters blocked traffic at 8th and Cherry Streets in Center City. Our Steve Keeley was out there and on the ground and had some very frustrated drivers were on Race Street and other areas around this scene. They were struggling to get to work and elsewhere around the city this morning. Got a couple different shots of the protest. Looked like there were maybe 15, 20 protesters. They were later on the move. Showing you a couple shots of the event this morning. Again, not a huge protest. It was continued for a while. And it was mostly a traffic headache for commuters in Center City this morning. We also had a few ground shots of the protest. We'll show you those. Sky Fox was also over the scene this morning of a fire on 5th Street. Firefighters made quick work of the basement fire that was reported. We'll show you some video of that. Again, this was reported on the 2100 block of North 5th Street. The fire was knocked down. Crews were there a little before 9 o'clock. The fire was reported completely knocked down shortly thereafter. There were some searches of the building and nobody was found. The fire was placed under control. This was a basement fire in a 2-story dwelling. Show you a little bit of the firefighters going to work here and venting the ceiling, the roof. And you'll see the hose spraying out of the basement as well during this.
Are here and the men who are standing with us as we fight every day for the right to vote. As an American, as a United States citizen, one of the greatest rights that we have is the power to vote. The power of the vote is one of the most amazing things that we have as an American citizen. Voting is power. So many times you hear those who feel disenchanted and not heard. They say, I feel like I have no power. And today, as we celebrate a moment in our history when those individuals, citizens of the United States who did not have the right to vote, came together. And we want to emphasize that women's rights are voting rights. And that's why we stand here today. We're celebrating the 170 years after Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention. At the convention of 1848, women banded together to demand rights, but they almost didn't get the right to vote because some women said it was too radical. Most of our ancestors were not in this mostly all-white convention, but Frederick Douglass stood up and he argued for women to have the right to vote. He said, and I quote, "Denying this right would mean harming one half of the moral and intelligent power of the government of the world." The convention ended with passing a resolution for the right for women to vote. This is a case where women were disruptive, where women came together and really debated. And they had an option. They could be silent and take things status quo or push forward and disrupt. They chose to move forward. And we stand here today because these women in 1848 decided to push forward. The fight for women's rights continued. In 1913, a woman staged the suffrage parade in D.C. to demand the vote. The march was all white, but a few brave African American women who were the founding members of Delta Sigma Theta, and I'm proud to be a member of Delta Sigma Theta, they demanded to join the march. And my sisters and my AKAs and my other sororities has continued the fight for women to vote. In 1920, women finally received the right to vote. Now I want you to know in 2020, it will finally be 100 years that women have had the right to vote. So when you hear the messaging and you hear the fight for women for rights, when we talk about equal pay, when we talk about the rights to have jobs and to have paid family leave, when we talk about the rights, we're talking about the power that women, one half of our moral and intelligent part of this country, are still demanding in our economy today. I want to tell you that women right now is the largest voting bloc in America. Women. And we, as women of Congress, and the few good men that stand with us, we are going to ensure that we rise from 22% of this government. Only 22% of our Congress are represented by women. We will continue to fight. When it comes to health care, I feel that any American that thinks it's okay for a room full of men to close the door and make decisions about women's health care needs to be energized. I'm so excited to stand here on the shoulders of my four mothers who had the courage and the tenacity to fight so that we can have the right to vote. I'm going to bring up our first speaker, and that will be, is Lois Franco here? I'm going to bring up Lois Franco, who is the chair of the Democratic Working Women's Group.
Thank you, Brenda, Vice Chair of the Democratic Working Women's Group, and to my colleagues who are here. 170 years ago, a brave, courageous group gathered at Seneca Falls, the convention, to declare that all women and men are created equal and demand that the women get the right to vote. It took 70 long years to get that ratification, and then many more struggles for women to make economic and educational gains, and also gain that all-important reproductive freedom. And now, President Trump and Republicans want to end the freedoms granted under Roe v. Wade and take us back to the days of coat hanger medicine. We are learning a painful lesson that elections matter. Our foremothers knew this, and that's why they fought tirelessly for the vote. So my message today to the women of this country, in the spirit of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, fight back, because we must not go back. And next, I'm going to bring up Judy Chu, Chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus.
Thank you. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. With the addition of those two simple words, and women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton started a revolution in Seneca Falls 170 years ago. At that time, women in America, the land of the free, were prevented from inheriting property, signing contracts, serving on a jury, and prevented from voting. Women were very much second-class citizens, but the 200 women who gathered in Seneca Falls dared to believe that they could change that. And they were right. Their voices were heard, and the obvious injustices became impossible to justify. Step by step, we gained the freedoms and rights men had denied us until 72 years later, we finally did the impossible and amended the Constitution to give us the right to vote. And that movement inspired movements amongst a diversity of people, including Chinese Americans who were prevented from becoming naturalized citizens so that they could not vote, and in fact did not gain that right until 1943. But it was the inspiration of the women's movement that caused that. And while the women at Seneca Falls showed us that we deserve equality, they also showed us that the only way to get it is to fight for it. So that's what we have to do today. We have to fight for access to health care, the right to make our own medical decisions, the right to keep our families together, and the right to protect everybody's access to the voting booth. So if we don't need men to tell us what choices that we can make. The heroes at Seneca Falls made sure of that. It's up to us to continue to fight until each of us has the equality that is promised in our declaration that all men and women are created equal. Thank you, and I would like to now call upon Linda Sanchez, our Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus.
Good morning, and thank you to all of you who are here today to stand with us to commemorate something that has been historic and has really pushed progress for women in this country for decades. I'm proud to stand with Representative Brenda Lawrence, with the Democratic Women's Caucus, and with many of my sisters in Congress to commemorate the Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls over 170 years ago. We honor women all across our country that kept pushing and fighting and pulling and persisting for an equal voice in our government. Their trailblazing leadership has made it possible for all of us to stand here today. We have made so much progress over the years, but we still have a long way to go. Today, women represent a relatively small but growing fraction of the United States Congress, and we have high hopes that in the next midterm elections, that number will grow even larger. Our strength and our voice come from brave rebels who fought over 170 years ago for one important thing that starts the ball rolling, and that's our right to vote. So we will continue to defend their legacy as we push for greater equality for our daughters and our granddaughters. It's not a secret that there is a concerted effort to roll back the clock on progress that women have made over all those decades. Women's rights, our right, for example, to make decisions over our own bodies, are under attack. Women's right to have equal economic opportunities are under attack. Women's right to not be discriminated against, for example, in the premiums that we pay for our health care insurance, are under attack. And there are many, many ways that this administration and this Republican-controlled Congress are trying to undermine our ability to have a voice and a seat at the table. So we have to keep up the fight. We will not stop. We will not stop until the United States Congress looks like the America it is elected to represent. And with that, I'm pleased to turn over the microphone to Representative Terry Sewell. She's the co-chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus, the co-chair of CBC Civil and Voting Rights Task Force, a champion for women's rights. Terry Sewell.
Thank you all for being here today and joining with us. It's such a privilege for me to be able to stand here as a member of Congress with women leaders and trailblazers from across the country in recognition of the anniversary of Seneca Falls Convention. Today's anniversary represents 170 years of our fight for women's rights, 170 years of conventions, of marches, of protests, and of petitions. 170 years of courage in the face of injustice and discrimination. 170 years and counting, and yet she still persists. As Alabama's first African-American woman elected to a federal office, I never forget that my work here is built on the sacrifices of so many other women who came before me. Women like Elizabeth Stanton, who declared in 1848 that the great truth that, quote, no just government can be formed without the consent of the governed, all of the governed. And women like Sojourner Truth, who fought the twin evils of slavery and racism. But we cannot sacrifice ourselves today and be satisfied with the accomplishments of just the past. In 2018, we are still having to fight for women's rights. You know, old battles have become new again. So many of us thought that we had won these battles. Our mothers had fought for these battles. Our foremothers had fought for these battles. But once again, progress is elusive. Progress must be obtained in every generation. We must fight for the progress that we've made and continue to make. So it's so important that we not only acknowledge the anniversary today, but we also know that we have so much more work to be done. That means passing the better deal for democracy that we as Democrats are articulating in this year's election. The better deal for democracy is our plan as Democrats to restore voter protection, to increase transparency in our government, and to stop the influence of big money in our elections. If we want to secure women's rights, we have to make sure that women have a seat at the table. And I know you all know that so many women, especially those like Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman to walk the halls of Congress, was infamous in saying, if there's no more chairs, bring a folding chair to sit at the table. We deserve to have a right at the table. We as women make up more than 50% of the population, and yet here in Congress, we're only 22%. So I say to all of you, we have much work to do because old battles have become new again. We can today celebrate 170 years of the Seneca Falls Convention, but we must remember that we have much work to do. thank you all for coming out and supporting us today. And let us remember to put on our walking shoes, because there's still a lot of marching, protesting, petitioning that we must do. Now, I'd like to bring to the stage Norma Torres, who is co-chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Task Force. Norma?
Thank you, Terry. It's wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Congresswoman Lawrence, for gathering us today to mark this momentous anniversary and to renew our commitment to protect the voting rights and freedoms for all women. Just think, less than a century ago, women didn't have the right to vote. Less than 55 years ago, African American women were still barred from the ballot box. But women, from suffragists to our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, fought fiercely and courageously to change all of that. They fought for equality and progress, the very same causes driving women today to take to the streets of cities, big and small, to make sure that women get a level playing field in every industry and facet of life. You only need to look at the Women's March and the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement to see it for yourselves. Women's voices matter. They make a difference. And that has never been more important than right now, this very moment. We know that our vote is our voice. And now it is time for those voices to be heard loud and clear once again. That means in every election. Remember, it was voters sitting out in 2014 midterms that resulted in Justice Gorsuch being seated instead of Merrick Garland. It was the surprise election losses of 2016 in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that will shape Justice Kennedy's seat. President Trump's nominee to replace him, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, has the power to reshape the rights and freedoms of American women for many years to come. From rolling back civil rights and voting rights to ending a woman's right to decide what to do with her own body and her ability to access reproductive care. We can't afford to turn back the clock on the progress that we have made and the women before us have worked so hard to make. It is why I am proud to co-sponsor bills that would make it easier for women to cast their votes by getting rid of burdensome identification requirements and requiring states to automatically register eligible voters. As we reflect on the incredible contributions of the women at Seneca Falls, let us also think of the world that we want to leave for our daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. Let us keep up the fight to protect their rights and to secure equality and opportunity for all women. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Congresswoman Lawrence. And it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Marcy Kaptur.
Thank you, Norma, very much. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I want to thank Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence for bringing us all together. I want to thank the women who are here, women members and male members, and all of the outside organizations that have joined us. As we speak with you today, I offer my words in memory of Congresswoman Louise Slaughter of New York, who served here until her late 80s and was from Seneca Falls, and you couldn't have a single conversation with Louise when she didn't say Seneca Falls. And so I think that she joins us today in spirit, right? And the heritage of which we are a part and the progress that we are making together for the American people. Voting rights are human rights. I'm reminded of Pastor John Roberts from Indiana Missionary Baptist Church in Toledo, Ohio, who says to his congregants, no vote, no power. Your vote, your power. And as we face this election and as we anticipate celebrating the centenary of women's right to vote, it is important for us to remember that today here in this House, women constitute about 20% of the 435 members who serve. In the entire history of the United States, of the nearly 12,000 people who have served in the House of Representatives, just a little over 200 have been women. We constitute historically about 2% of the voices that have been allowed to debate and to pass legislation inside this House of the People. In Ohio, where I come from, we are flying into the wind as we move toward this November's election. Our Secretary of State, a male, has removed over 2 million people from the voting rolls, removed over 2 million people from the voting rolls in the last 5 years. If you haven't voted in the last 6 years, you are automatically removed, even though you are eligible. We have a tremendous candidate for Secretary of State in Ohio, Kathleen Clyde. She's going to change that. She's going to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. I have 2 messages for the women and men of America, but especially for the women. Register to vote and apply to be a precinct worker at the polling place come November. Yeah. Make sure you are on the inside, not the outside. And make sure that you have training to allow you to defend the vote of every single person who comes into that precinct. You must know the rules for voting. You work for a day. You help the country to preserve its republic. We invite the women of America to use their vote this year. Use your power. Thank you so very much for bringing us together, then.
Now we're going to bring forward an amazing woman leader in our caucus, and that is Rosa DeLero.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you and Lois for the extraordinary work that you do with the Democratic Women's Working Group. It's such an honor for me to be here with all of my colleagues this morning, sisters, and we had a brother here a few short minutes ago. I also want to thank the organizations who are here today. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, National Women's Law Center, Delta Sigma Theta, the Women's Vote Centennial Initiative, and the American Association of University Women. And why I recognize them is because the gains that we have made over the years have been spearheaded, and we have relied on the work and the research and the data that all of these organizations have come together on, and they have helped us to forge the kinds of policy initiatives that really make a difference in the lives of women and their families today. And American women have made great strides since the Seneca Falls Convention, but we are still facing extraordinary and disproportionate economic challenges. That is why I believe we need a new Seneca Falls moment in which we demand economic equality. We must. Women still only earn 80 cents on average for every dollar paid to men, despite the fact that women are half the workforce, more than half of the population, and nearly half of the primary breadwinners in America. No surprise, then, that families are struggling. The Republican corporate tax cut has been a dream for the wealthy, but a nightmare for the rest who are still suffering from stagnant wages and the rising costs of childcare, housing, health care, and yes, food. In fact, according to new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, wages for ordinary non-management workers fell last year by 0.2%. That is why I believe it is time for a new Seneca Falls moment to address these economic challenges. 5 years ago, House Democrats offered an economic agenda for women and their families called When Women Succeed, America Succeeds. And today, it's When Families Succeed, America Succeeds. And the agenda would ensure equal pay for equal work, paid sick days, paid family leave, fair work schedules, and access to quality, affordable child care. It is time to act. It is long past time. In 2018, women continue to be paid less than men for the same job. In 2018, American men and women are the only in the developed world without guaranteed paid maternity leave and paid family and sick leave. In 2018, quality, affordable child care is not accessible to working families struggling to pay their bills. So yes, in 2018, it is time to act. And as we know, women are answering the call. The day after the inauguration, millions stormed Washington in the Women's March to make it very clear that we would not be silenced and we would not be ignored. Since Donald Trump's presidential victory, women are running for office in record numbers to rebut the Trump administration's attack on women's health, on labor rights, and economic security. We know that women college graduates are voting in big numbers, and they are voting for Democrats. African American women have played a big role in all of the off-year elections. And whether we win the majority depends on whether unmarried women, those who are widowed, single, divorced, or separated, and millennial women will join them. And we have the agenda which will ensure that they will join us in voting for Democrats. You know, if Democrats take back the majority in November, let me just say, because I did a calculation of this, on the Appropriations Committee, a woman, Congresswoman Nita Lowey, would be the first woman to chair the Appropriations Committee. Also on the Appropriations Committee, 6 or 7 of the subcommittees would be headed up by women, including Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur in that event. I also took a look at all the rest of the committees that are in the House of Representatives, and 27 women would either chair a committee or a subcommittee. That has the power of changing the agenda in the United States of America. And I have seen that effect of women in politics and leadership can have in our country. Women's health, domestic violence, economic empowerment were once, quote, fringe issues. Now they are front and center. Electing women changes the agenda. 170 years ago, 68 women and 32 men co-signed the Declaration of Sentiments, and they said defiantly, and I quote, that all men and women are created equal. It is time for a new Seneca Falls moment. Equal rights must mean equal pay. I thank you all for being here this morning, and wonderful to join with you. And now, Kristen. I'm sorry. Kristen. Okay. Do we have any information on Kristen? Go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
We're now bringing forth Kristen Clark, who's the Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Clark. I'm President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And for the last 55 years, we've been fighting against racial injustice and discrimination across our country. But it is our work to ensure access to the ballot box that has been a focal point of our agenda for the last 55 years. Today represents an important moment in our democracy. This Supreme Court vacancy reminds us that elections have consequences. As the balance of our nation's highest court hangs in the balance, it is my hope that communities across the country and women will seize this moment to appreciate their power at the ballot box and to understand how critical it is that we get out and exercise the right to vote in 2018 and ensure that our voice is heard. Let me tell you briefly about the voter suppression that we're seeing across our country today. All across the country, we are seeing states resort to a playbook of suppression tactics to restrict access to the ballot box for Black women and other communities of color across the country. From photo ID rules to proof of citizenship requirements to cuts on early voting, racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, and so much more, states are working actively to limit access to the ballot box for communities of color across our country because there is so much at stake. We are seeing this administration move at a relentless pace to turn the clock back. This is a Justice Department that has reignited the war on drugs, that has turned its back on enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, that filed a brief in the Supreme Court defending voter suppression. At every turn, we intend to hold Attorney General Jeff Sessions accountable and ensure that he's using taxpayer dollars to protect the fragile civil rights of our nation's most vulnerable communities. I'm proud to stand here today with the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Democratic Women's Working Group. Together we stand on the shoulders of Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King and Ida Wells, Mary Church Terrell and Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, and so many other fierce Black women who have stood as the moral compass of our nation. Together we are fighting to save our democracy, and it is most important that we keep the current battle around the U.S. Supreme Court vacancy front and center. The U.S. Supreme Court is the final venue, the venue of last resort for the most critical and important crises in our nation. This Senate needs to do its job, vet Judge Kavanaugh carefully to ensure that he is somebody who will fairly interpret and apply the Constitution and our nation's federal civil rights laws. Too much is at stake, and we can't turn the clock back. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dave, am I okay here?
I want to recognize the presence of Delta Sigma Theta leadership. Would you please raise your hand? And the women who were disruptive and made a difference. I now have the pleasure. I would love to be in the head of the women who were at the conference in Seneca Falls when they talked about having the right to vote. I'm sure there was a woman there that thought, what if we got the power to vote and women could be elected to office? And then what if our vote equated to a woman having the highest seat in our House of Representatives? I know today those women who we stand on their shoulders will be very proud of this next amazing woman that I'm introducing, and that's Nancy Pelosi, our Democratic leader.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Lawrence, and thank you for your leadership of the Democratic Women's Working Group. To you and to Lois Frankel, thank you for bringing us together with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus, and of course the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and our friends in leadership on the outside of the Congress. I'm just going to tell you two stories and associate myself with the remarks of those who have spoken before. I know that our longest serving woman in Congress in the House of Representatives, Marcy Kaptur, was here earlier. Still is Marcy, and the godmother of When Women Succeed, America Succeeds, Rosa DeLauro, and so many champions for women in the Congress and outside the Congress. But listening to the comments of, I was reminded of two stories because we are talking a lot about shoulders. And when we celebrate this 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, remember a couple things. First of all, the proper celebration of that will be have the highest number of women and women of color in the Congress of the United States at that time, and we fully intend to do that in great number. And it's going to be quite wonderful. Listening to the speeches about shoulders reminded me of when I went to my first meeting as a leader of the Democrats in Congress at the White House with President Bush and the other House and Senate Democrats and Republican leadership. I thought this was an ordinary meeting at the White House. I've been to many as an appropriator and as an intelligence person. But when I went in the door and the door closed behind me, I realized it was unlike any other meeting I had ever been to, or that any woman had ever been to, because there it was, the leadership of our country, all white male, and I, as a woman, having a seat at the table. And why I tell this story is because, as President Bush, ever gracious, welcoming me there, said how he thought it would be interesting to have a woman, a different view, etc. I felt very closed in my seat. Now, my colleagues have heard me tell this story over and over again. I felt very closed in my seat. I was getting just pushed together on my seat. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I realized there I was with Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Alice Paul. The list goes on and on. Our suffragettes who fought so hard for us to have the right to vote. And as they sat with me on that chair just for an instant, I could hear them say, "At last we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone. And my thought was, we want more. We want more women, people of color, etc. at that table. But it was, again, a reminder that none of us needs, but nonetheless an impression that we're all standing on the shoulders of those people so courageously in Seneca Falls who set forth that important proclamation those many, many years ago that we observe today. I also recall a story that when I became Speaker, I wanted to have more women and people of color represented in the statues, etc., in the Congress, and we were dedicating the bust of Sojourner Truth. And it was new in the Obama administration, brand new at that time, and we were honored to have Michelle Obama come speak. And when she spoke, she said this. She said, "You know, I can't help but think what Sojourner Truth would think to see a woman Speaker of the House. How thrilled she would be. But I can't even imagine what she would think to see me, Michelle Obama, as the First Lady of the United States." So moving, so moving. I get emotional just thinking of Michelle Obama talking about an African-American first family and what Sojourner Truth would think of that. But this is a time, and our founders, those women whose shoulders we stand on, and all the young people who stand on some of our shoulders, have to know that what they taught, this is an ongoing fight. The same people who resisted women having the right to vote resist women having the right to anything. And again, the challenge continues to go on. In that Supreme Court, sitting a little bit now by the trees, but clear in the mind of the American people the role it plays in protecting our rights. We must fight to make sure that people who go there, for decades really, people who go there honor the Constitution of the United States. Honor the stare decisis that says you cannot overturn Brown versus the Board of Education. You cannot overturn marriage equality initiatives, Roe v. Wade, the rest of it. These have been considered constitutional by this court before and have the full support of the American people. So as we go forward in all of this, we just have to remember that it's an ongoing fight. And just remember that when women got the right to vote, the headline said, "Women given the right to vote." Women weren't given the right to vote. Women fought for it. They marched for it. They struggled for it. They starved for it. They were starved for it. They were rejected by their families. It's a fight. It was a fight then, and they weren't given the right to vote. So nobody ever gives power to anybody else. We have to assert it. So I thank our Brenda Lawrence and Lois Frankel and all those the leadership for bringing us together here today to reassert our commitment in that fight and to be strong shoulders for others to stand on as we stand on the shoulders of those who courageously fought so hard and went before us as we observed the 170th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Declaration, which shook the world. We must continue to shake the world. I yield back. Thank you.
Now we're going to bring LaShawn Warren, who is the Senior Vice President of Campaigns and Program, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Good morning. I'm LaShawn Warren, Vice President of Programs and Campaigns for the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. It is a coalition of more than 200 national organizations working to build an America as good as its ideals. It is truly an honor to be here with such extraordinary women, with all of you who stand on the front lines fighting for the soul of our nation. But the occasion that brings us together today is the anniversary of the historic Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls. It reminds us that this work is not new. We carry forth the legacy of brave women who fought before us, women whose wisdom, resolve, perseverance made us a better America. I want to begin by lifting up another important date this week, the birthday of Ida B. Wells, a fearless journalist who broadcast to the world over 100 years ago lessons that we must not forget today. Voting rights are civil rights, and campaigns to suppress the right to vote are campaigns to suppress the power of the people, to erase our bodies, to silence our stories and our voices. We need look no further than the Trump administration's playbook to know this to be true. The people who would restrict our right to vote are the same people who would separate families along borders. They're the same people who draw districts and maps that undercut the representation of people of color. They are the same people who lock up black and brown people at disproportionate rates to strip us of our basic human rights. They are the same people who would pick a Supreme Court nominee who would take away women's control of our bodies and undermine the right to vote. These deliberate tactics seek to silence. But I am here today to say that we will not be quiet. We will not relent in our pressure. Millions of women across the country, many of whom never considered themselves to be activists, have taken up the fight to fight for a fair and just America. An unprecedented number of women are running at all levels of government. Young women are marching for Black lives, gun safety, religious freedom, and protection of dreamers. Voters of all colors are rejecting hate and voting their values, like in states like Virginia and Alabama, where Black women are leading the charge. Miss Wells once said, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." Our democracy is worn, but is not beyond repair. Together, we will continue to shine the light on truth. We will call on Congress to reject voter suppression and fully restore the Voting Rights Act. We will fight the intractable, and we will realize the vision of an America that celebrates the power of we, the people. Thank you.
Our last speaker for today will be Anna Chu, who is the Vice President of Policy and Strategy for the National Women's Law Center. And while she's coming to the mic, I would like to recognize the presence and representatives of the AKA sorority who are here today in support as well.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for having me here today, and thank you, Leader Pelosi. My name is Anna Chu, and I'm Vice President for Policy and Strategy at the National Women's Law Center. The National Women's Law Center has been fighting for women's rights and opportunities for over 45 years now. And during those 45 years, we have been in a lot of battles. But right now, we are really in the fight of our lives, a fight over the direction of the Supreme Court for the next 30 to 40 years. And this fight illustrates just how critical women's right to vote is. We saw in the last election that it was a mere 80,000 votes in 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, that delivered the presidency to Donald Trump. And that vote, the decision of the people who voted, and whether they did decide to vote, has put all of our rights on the line with the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. His nomination threatens the balance of the court for a generation. Judge Kavanaugh poses a direct threat to women's voting rights. He wrote an opinion upholding South Carolina's discriminatory voter ID law that would disenfranchise tens of thousands of minority voters. He issued a ruling to allow the government to continue blocking a young immigrant woman from accessing abortion care. And he has been critical of the Affordable Care Act. And according to some of his clerks, he has written the legal roadmap to dismantling it. And in employment discrimination cases, Judge Kavanaugh has sided with workers, or sided against workers time and time again. With this nomination, women's ability to make decisions over our own bodies, our ability to access health care, our ability to succeed and work and at school is on the line. So on this anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention, I say to all the women who are marching the streets, who are calling Congress, who are protesting the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, to remember that the ultimate act of disruption and the ultimate use of our power is to vote. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who have come out today. Our message is loud and clear. We are the moral and intelligent 50% of this government, of this country. And we will not be silent. We will not sit on the sideline, just like the women at Seneca Falls, who refuse to be pushed to the side and not being given the right to vote. So we stood up and we took it. This is not an anti-anything. This is pro-America. This is pro-family. This is pro-human rights. And we will continue to be a voice. And as we as women, the beautiful sex of this great country, as we continue to use our brains and our intelligence and our heart and our compassion, we will be leaders and we'll keep fighting and protecting the right to vote. Thank you all so much.
You've been watching a live feed from Washington, D.C. of a House event where they were celebrating the 170th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. It was the first ever held in the United States, and it convened with about 200 women in attendance. It was a precursor to the right to vote, women's suffrage. We were following a live event. Let's see if we have it. Oh, it just went away. Skyfox is over the scene of a building fire in South Philadelphia. This is at Broad and Girard. We are awaiting more information, but right now we do not have a feed of that for you. Let's show you Ocean City, New Jersey right now. That's a look at the boardwalk and people enjoying a nice summer day. It's a much more comfortable day out there today with the humidity has dropped across the area. Let's get you a look at Doppler radar, and there's not much to see. It's a clear sunny day across most of the area. Here are the current temperatures. We're in the 70s in Philadelphia, so much more comfortable. Let's see if we can show you the difference in temperature from just a day ago. It's pretty substantial. Of course, rain and showers that moved through helped cool things down yesterday. So we're reaping the benefits of that. Here is that temperature change. It's about 10 degrees cooler out there, and definitely the heat index is going to be much lower. Feels like just 72 right now. Wind is probably helping to cool things down. Here's a look at temperatures across the Northeast. And here are U.S. temperatures. clear those highs from yesterday. We got to 94 in Philadelphia. Again, the average this time of year is about 87 degrees. Right now, Doylestown appears to still be in the 60s, although I think that may be a little bit dated. Philadelphia is at 79 now, so that's probably a little bit old. That is rain showers off. That's flood watch from yesterday. And there's our clear radar again. Let's show you the 7-day forecast. And you'll see where Sue Saria this morning was calling today a 9. Certainly less humid than it has been. We should get to a high of about 87. It's going to be sunny and nice on Thursday and Friday as well. Friday when the Phillies come back to town and start a restart after the All-Star break with a series against the San Diego Padres. Then they'll be in town for a bit. The rain and storm chances resume again on Saturday. Let's get you, here's another live event occurring. Let's get you some information about this. This is Washington, D.C.
Slightly more worried about lower inflation still, but I think for a long time, inflation was below target and we were pushing up. We've now just about reached a symmetric 2% objective, so it's very close. And I think from this point forward, the risks are roughly balanced.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, Vice Chair of the committee.
Well, Chair Powell, thank you for being here. I want to shift to cryptocurrency, which is a bit of your monetary policy hat, but also a bit of your regulatory hat. And I want to get your thinking along the lines of cryptocurrency. So, the Bank of International Settlements just released a report saying that cryptocurrency.
This is a House Financial Services Committee holding a hearing on monetary policy and the state of the economy. That's Federal Reserve Chair Powell who's testifying.
Cryptocurrencies are currently not big enough yet to matter, or something along those lines. I would submit the report by the Bank of International Settlements misses the mark of the potential of blockchain, the potential of crypto more broadly. But there's a great deal of interest in your views and central banks' views more broadly on cryptocurrency. So can you just outline to me your thinking on cryptocurrency?
Sure. So first, I would say, I think the question I was asked that you're referring to was, do cryptocurrencies currently present a serious financial stability threat? And my answer was, they're not big enough to do that yet.
Sure.
That's really what I was saying, not that they're not a longer-term thing. So they are very challenging because, cryptocurrencies are great if you're trying to hide money or if you're trying to launder money or if you're, so that we have to be very conscious of that. I think there are also significant investor risks. Investors, relatively unsophisticated investors, see the asset going up in price and they think, this is great, I'll buy this. In fact, there is no promise behind that. It's not really a currency. It doesn't really have any intrinsic value. So I think there are investor consumer protection issues as well. Another thing I'll say is that we're not looking at this at the Fed as something that we should be doing, that the Fed would do a digital currency. That's not something we're looking at. So mainly I have concerns. I mean, if you think about what currencies do, they're supposed to be a means of payment and a store of value, basically. And cryptocurrencies they're not really used very much in payment. Typically people sell their cryptocurrencies and then pay in dollars. And in terms of a store of value, look at the volatility in it. It's just not there.
Well, has there been discussion with other G7 central banks along the lines of cryptocurrency?
It comes up a lot, yeah. I mean, I'm only just starting to go to G7 meetings, but it comes up quite a bit in international forums of various kinds. There's a broad concern that the public needs to be well informed about this, I think, and that again, the money laundering and terrorist financing and all of that is a big risk.
It's a big risk, but is there any conclusion that you're hearing, or is it just a broad concern?
Well, I think the BIS report and others have called out these risks and called on the appropriate regulatory bodies to address them. We don't have jurisdiction over cryptocurrency. We have jurisdiction over banks, and so we know in their activities with cryptocurrency companies and cryptocurrency, we can address that. Others can address the SEC can address the investor protection aspects of it.
But you don't see this as impairing your ability to act on monetary policy,
not
just given the current shape and scope of the size of the market.
Really not at all today.
Okay, so we currently have some level of framework around regulation of cryptocurrency. You got a money service license at the state level. In our 50 states, they all have some requirement. So there's a great look into that conversion, the movement of cash into cryptocurrency or out of cryptocurrency back into cash. We have some element of regulation at the CFTC and the SEC. So there is some broad framework of it, but not a concerted effort by the federal government to understand what's happening in cryptocurrency. Do you have any staff resources devoted to figuring out cryptocurrency or following cryptocurrency?
Yes, so we've looked at it carefully. I spoke about it. Other governors have spoken about it. Reserve Bank presidents. There's plenty of work going on, but again, we don't have this regulatory authority to deal with it. So I think that's the key thing is to be looking at the places where there is that regulatory authority.
Okay. So, thank you, Chairman.
Jim Mignol's back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for one thing that's obvious, and that is that you haven't gotten yourself in trouble. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. You haven't gotten yourself in trouble. You've been a great public servant, and I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, you shouldn't have to say that these days, but you really do, what we've seen recently. I do want to ask a little more about cryptocurrency, however. You talked about terrorism, and you also talked about hiding money. I had a bill here with a colleague of mine on the other side exactly on that point, and I'd like you to go a little deeper on that. You said it's not an issue yet because it's not large enough, but it does seem to be growing. And you said you also have jurisdiction over the banks. Should you have jurisdiction here, cryptocurrency?
That's a deep question. We're not seeking it.
But should you?
I'm not going to say yes today. We're not looking to. It's right in the middle of the SEC's turf, the investor protection aspects of it. I think Treasury and FinCEN and other people have. I think it should be well regulated. I don't really see us as probably the right group to do that.
But it seems to me right now that no one seems to have quite a hold on it either. It seems to be this amorphous glob that's moving around. You talk to the SEC and they at the same time kind of kick the ball around also. I mean, shouldn't there be a more concerted effort to try to figure out who's in charge here of cryptocurrency? Because I think that there is lots of opportunities here for not only terrorism, but also for drug trafficking, sexual exploitation, human trafficking. You said terrorism, but all sorts of bad actors, I think, can use this. And I don't think that we have a good hold on it yet.
I think it's a good idea to focus on getting the regulation at the federal level of this right. Again, we're not seeking that at the Fed, but and I know Treasury has done some thinking on this. This would be an area where they'd have the lead to sort of identify the right regulatory structure. They may have already published something on this. I'm not sure.
In fact, part of the bill asks them to speed that up and to report back to us. I do want to ask you also about the issue of wage increases. You said that there's been some movement upwards, 2%, 3%. I think you said 3%, and so it's beating inflation. Yes. But the question was then specifically on people of color, African Americans and Latinos. You said you had some breakout numbers for those?
Not handy, I don't. I can get those for you.
Okay, I'd be interested in that because I see the same situation in California where you have people that have been underemployed, working very, very hard, 2 and 3 jobs, and they continue to say that they haven't seen that wage increase yet. We have seen for sure, and I think you're correct about the unemployment go down, but we haven't seen yet certainly not in my district in any measurable way, the increases in wages.
So wages in general have been somewhat slow in moving up, and as the labor market has tightened, and we understand that really matters to people's lives a lot.
Yeah.
And we do see them moving up in the aggregate, but I'll also be happy to supply.
You said there was an issue of productivity, because maybe this time the reason the rates haven't increased as much is because of productivity. Could you talk about that for a second?
Sure. So over a long period of time, wages really can't forever go up faster than productivity. Productivity is slow, but there's a reason for that, and that is after the financial crisis, there are many reasons for it. After the financial crisis, though, companies didn't invest much because there was no need to, there wasn't demand, the economy was weak. And so weak investment drives, it casts a shadow over productivity growth for a number of years. So investment has now popped up. Investment was strong in 2017, that continues in 2018. That's really important, and we're glad to see it. But it may take some time to show up in higher productivity. It's not because people aren't working harder. It's because you need those
Here's some breaking news we're going to bring you here on Fox 29 News Now. Again, I'm Paul Ruppel with Fox 29. We are hearing that the Pennsylvania's highest court has upheld Philadelphia's tax on sweetened drinks, rejecting a challenge to the soda tax by merchants and the beverage industry. This reports from the Associated Press. The state Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that the 1.5 cent per ounce levy aimed at distributors and dealer-level transactions does not legally duplicate an existing tax. I'll show you a little video.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Powell.
Beverage tax raised nearly $79 million in 2017 over its first 12 months. Both of the dissenting justices say that the tax does duplicate taxes already in place on retail sales of soda in this state. If fully passed on to consumers, the soda tax rate $1.44 on a six-pack of 16-ounce bottles. Again, the Supreme Court has upheld Philadelphia's tax on sweetened drinks, rejecting a challenge by merchants and beverage industry. We'll have more on the story on the Fox 29 News at 5. In the meantime, we're going to bring you back to the event. Actually, let's go to a procession that's occurring in Bensalem, Pennsylvania.
It's come down quite a bit. How about the Hispanic unemployment rate? Is that going up under these harmful economic policies? It's come down quite a bit. So is it fair to say these policies actually aren't harmful? They're actually growing the economy. They're putting people back to work. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Powell?
It's fair to say.
Unfortunately, it looks like our feed is cutting in and out. Let's put it back and see if it stays with us. And we'll get you a little bit more information about what's going on here. It looks like we keep losing that feed, so let's get you back to the event in Washington, D.C.
I want to talk to you about trade. I'm a free trader like you are. I think free trade is great for our economy. But I also think that if you don't have fair trade, if you have deals with places like China where you have American companies that invest millions or billions of dollars in their technology, and you do business with China and they steal it from you, or they subsidize their companies that come and do business in America where we have, for the most part, free trade ourselves, where we actually can't, they have barriers to American produced goods. How long does that relationship last where our economy is open, theirs is closed? Does that set us up for a long-term successful economy as it relates to China?
So I strongly agree with you that trade needs to be fair as well as free.
Is it fair now?
Well, I think if you look at the rules-based post-war system, it's consistently resulted in lower and lower trade barriers.
That's not, no. Our relationship with China, is it a fair trade? Do you have a fair trade relationship with China?
I think it's very clear that some countries, in China in particular, have less open trading systems than we would like, and
it's not fair.
Appropriate for us to address that.
And so do you think it's easier to deal with China 15 years from now when their economy is that much larger and stronger, or maybe their military is larger and stronger than it is today?
That's really a judgment for the people who have responsibility for trade.
I would agree with that. I'm going to quickly turn to the President's America First policy. Do you agree with that?
Maybe you could be more specific.
Well, do you think we should put American interests first? Do we think we should look out for the global interests or American interests?
I mean, we work under a statute that has us focused on maximum employment and stable prices here in America.
Maximum employment for Americans, not for the globe, right?
In America.
So we're looking out for Americans.
Of course, we live in a global economy where the global economy affects that.
No, that's true, but we can look at the global economy, but always how it affects our own
Entirely domestic. Our goals are entirely domestic.
Do you believe the U.S. insurance companies are well capitalized and solvent today?
Yes.
Do you believe that our system of regulating American insurers has worked well over the last 150 years?
I can speak to the last decade or so, and I'd say yes.
Pretty good, huh? So would you agree that we should not enter any international agreement or standard setting that would undermine our U.S. Insurance regulatory system, state-based model?
Yes, yeah, I would.
Great. My time is up. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
I commend the gentleman from Wisconsin and the chair of the Fed for their comments about insurance, and I'll probably disagree with many other things. Thank you once again for returning, where you will be independent and accountable, tall and short. The Fed plays an interesting role. First, as to cryptocurrencies, you and we should have the courage to ban them. As an investment, they're an investment with no investor protection. And they take the animal spirits, the willingness to invest, divert them from the real economy, and instead engage in what is basically gambling. Many jurisdictions support gambling only if there's local taxation, but cryptocurrencies don't pay gambling taxes. As a medium of exchange, cryptocurrencies offer no advantages over regular currencies unless you're a terrorist, a narcotics dealer, or a tax evader. There is no positive role for us for cryptocurrencies. A lot of discussion in here about who deserves credit for the good economy. Let me point out, since Dodd-Frank, 17 million jobs have been created, 15 million of them under Obama, 2 million under Trump. That's 15 million, 2 million. That's the right ratio. Now, the Trump administration claims credit for the last 3 months of the Obama presidency, but Obama was actually president until January 2017, but his policies remained in force all through 2017. Dodd-Frank, Janet Yellen's balance sheet, and Obama tax policies were in force until the beginning of this year. And in fact, the Fed policies and the securities regulation remain pretty much unchanged since the Obama administration. The chairman of this committee urges you to abandon all of the unconventional tools while taking credit for the good economy that is in part a result of your unconventional tools. I would say keep your balance sheet as big as it was when we achieved the economic growth that is so good that Democrats and Republicans are fighting over who gets credit. And certainly do not cut your balance sheet until Chairman Hensarling tells you how he's going to increase taxes to replace the $80 billion of profit you gave us last year because you had a big balance sheet. The chair talks about the inflation rate, the chair of this committee. You ought to have a goal of 2.5%, not 2%. The law that we passed in 1978 draws a 3% objective or maximum for inflation and for unemployment. So unemployment is still too high and inflation is too low, and if we have a looser economic policy, maybe we'll get somewhat higher inflation and the labor shortage necessary to increase wages. He puts forward the idea that somebody would save for their daughter's college education by putting money aside, but in a mattress where its value would decline by 30% by the time his young girl got to college. I'd say if you're smart enough to save for college education once your daughter is born, you're probably smart enough to invest the money in something that grows faster than inflation. As to trade, my party suffers from Trump derangement syndrome, which is whatever Trump does, we have to be the opposite. The fact is, China launched this trade war against us in the year 2000, right after 2/3 of Democrats voted against giving China most favored nation status. We were right then. We shouldn't change now. If there are those who say that trade deficits don't have a harm, they lead to hollowed out manufacturing, which leads to manufacturing towns where you have opioids, alcoholism, and votes for Donald Trump. 3 terrible scourges that hit the Midwest. As to your testimony, Mr. Chairman, you say that wages are growing a little faster than they did a few years ago. That's nominal wages. Real wages, if anything, have stagnated over the last year, depending upon your measure of inflation. One more reason for a looser monetary policy, faster economic growth. And, believe it or not, I have a question. That is, LIBOR was tainted by a scandal. You've got the Alternative Reference Rates Committee. Most of the LIBOR referenced debt is derivatives, but what really matters to people is mortgages. And what are you going to do to make sure that the new benchmark doesn't increase mortgage bargaining costs or disrupt the mortgage market? So that's the one question.
That's great. That's a great question. So you're right. Many mortgages reference LIBOR. LIBOR is a rate that's under a lot of pressure. It may not be there in 3 or 4 years, so there's a big move to find a good backup. We've identified a backup, and it's not designed to represent an increase at all in people's mortgage costs. Rather, it's designed to represent just a more sustainable rate that'll always be there and less volatile and more predictable, more reliable.
And it'll be as good for mortgages as it is for derivatives.
Yes.
Good.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, the chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, Ms. Wagner.
Thank you. I thank the chair and welcome Chairman Powell. In comments that you made shortly after being sworn in as chairman of the Federal Reserve, you noted that you were committed to, and I quote, explaining what we're doing and why we are doing it, and will continue to pursue ways to improve transparency both in monetary policy and in regulation. Sir, how much value do you place on being as open and transparent as possible so that not only Congress but the American people understand the decisions the Fed is making, why they're making those decisions? I'm just interested in what that kind of transparency and openness looks like.
So I think it's our obligation to explain ourselves. What we do is very important, sometimes not well understood, and it's really on us to explain what we're doing with financial regulation and monetary policy. We have this precious grant of independence. We have to earn it by being accountable, and the way we do that is through lots and lots of transparency. I mean, I see myself as following in the footsteps of 3 prior chairmen who worked on this: Greenspan, Bernanke, and Yellen.
When you say transparency, what are we talking about in a specific
In my case,
fashion?
So we doubled the number of press conferences. I'll have a press conference after every FOMC meeting. That's in monetary policy. That's a way for me to get out and talk about what the committee did at each meeting and communicate to the public in a comprehensible way. I've also focused very much on communicating in terms that people can understand generally, not just economists. There's a very small professional audience that understands what we do very, very well, and economists in Wall Street and that kind of thing. And I think the rest of the country needs to be let in on this too, and I'm trying very hard to do that.
I absolutely agree, especially in this era where we have a savings crisis and people need to understand the movements that you make as Fed chair, how it relates to monetary policy and how it affects them and how they invest for their future. So I absolutely applaud your efforts in terms of press conferences, but also trying to shape the vernacular so that everyday low and middle income investors and savers in this country can understand what your policy actually means to them personally. In 2012, the Fed dealt with a leak of confidential information relating to the deliberation of the Federal Open Markets Committee, FOMC. As you know, access to that information is valuable to markets and investors because the Fed does not make clear what it is likely to do in the future. The committee believes that a monetary policy rule would provide the public transparency into future monetary policy decisions and eliminate the value of leaks. Again, you've talked a lot about being transparent, and we've discussed it here previously, but you're the new boss. And what's going to change on the issue of securing some of that confidential information and transparency to prevent this going forward? And then also, when will the board improve its internal governance so episodes like these don't repeat themselves, sir?
We take the confidentiality of our deliberations very, very seriously, as you, I'm sure, know and would imagine. And, we remind every person who has access to FOMC information, including all the participants, but also all the staff, every year have to review those rules, have to signify that they understand, have read them, and are bound by them. So we do all of the things we can humanly think of to make sure that people understand their obligations to confidentiality, and I think
if I could interrupt, sir, as chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Committee, we have looked into this specific leak. We've had difficulty receiving, I think, specific information about your internal governance and exactly, how it is that we make sure these episodes don't repeat themselves. So, I'd like your brief comments on that, and also want to work with you to make sure that we're receiving the information in our role of oversight and investigation into these kinds of matters.
I'll be happy to take that offline and talk to you about it. I don't know what you're referring to about information you can't get. Obviously, there's a lot of confidential information that we don't release, that we try to protect. But in terms of our procedures and the kinds of things that we do, I would think that that's the kind of thing.
Specific to improvements of internal governance, I believe so.
Thank you very much for watching.
I thank you. Look forward to following up with you. And
Technical Operations Center.
I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman.